Josiah Flynt Willard was a muckraking American journalist of the Gilded Age. He specialized in low life and was the first writer to use underworld slang such as mob, squeal, speakeasy, fix, handout, pinch, joint. He spent months at a time living as a tramp and learning about their outlaw life, and he discovered that the tramps were having sex with each other. He wrote up a report about it with the title, Homosexuality Among Tramps. The report said, every hobo in the United States knows what unnatural intercourse means, talking about it freely, and according to my finding, every 10th man practices it and defends his conduct. In this video, I will discuss how Willard managed to cross the boundary from an upper-class upbringing to life as a tramp and what he found in the hobo camps. Josiah Flynt Willard was a 10th generation descendant of Major Simon Willard, one of the original New England settlers. Simon Willard spoke the Algonquin language and traded hatchets and knives for attractive land where he founded the town of Concord, Massachusetts, and he fought the Indians in King Philip's War. Simon Willard left an enormous progeny. There were Willard preachers and Willard politicians and Willard inventors. There was a Willard president of Harvard. There was a Willard with the Lewis and Clark expedition. There was a Willard governor of Indiana. There was a Willard abolitionist. There were Willards in Congress and Willards in state assemblies. One of them was another Josiah Flynt Willard, the grandfather of our Josiah Flynt Willard, the tramp expert. This is his wife, Mary Thompson Hill, at her spinning wheel. They went west, converted to the Methodist Church, and moved to Evanston, Illinois, so their son and daughter could attend Northwestern University. And they built a house there. It is now a museum called Rest Cottage. Their son, Oliver Willard, became publisher of the Chicago Post, and their daughter was the most famous Willard of them all. That was Miss Frances Willard, the president of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. She was a tireless campaigner for prohibition and women's suffrage. This statue of Miss Willard, donated by the state of Illinois, stands in the National Statuary Hall of the U.S. Capitol. While the generations of Willards were arriving and departing, the railroads came to America. Steel rails crossed the deserts and the mountains, reaching into the towns and villages and binding the nation together. The railroads created a new class of tycoons, Vanderbilt, Fisk, Jay Gould, and others. They were the gilded part of the Gilded Age. But with the trains came the tramps. This army of homeless vagabonds, panhandling at the kitchen door, alarmed settled citizens. They viewed tramps as criminals who might invade their homes and steal their children. In reality, the tramps were not all the same. Some were migrant workers following the crops. Some were disabled by mental illness or alcoholism. Some actually were criminals, but they were all tramps. Back in Evanston, there were problems. Miss Frances Willard was not made of marble. Far from it, she had a passionate heart and a habit of forming intense attachments to woman friends. Today, she would be understood as a lesbian. Frances developed a huge crush on a Northwestern student named Mary Bannister. But in the end, Mary became the wife of Frances's brother, Oliver, and it broke Frances's heart. This is what she said in her autobiography. My attachment was so great that when she properly preferred my brother, the loss of her was nothing less than a bereavement, a piteous sorrow for a year or more, as my journals testify, one of the keenest of my life. So they all lived together in Rest Cottage, Grandma Willard, Oliver, Mary, and Frances. Oliver and Mary had 2 sons and 2 daughters. Their younger son was Josiah Flynt Willard, later to become the muckraking journalist and tramp expert. For whatever reason, there was trouble at Rest Cottage. Oliver Willard mismanaged the Chicago Post, lost all the family money, and died of alcoholism at the age of 42. Frances and Mary took over the newspaper, but they were unable to save it. Mary took the girls to Berlin, and there she established a school for young women. Josiah was left with his Aunt Frances. By that time, she was delivering 400 rousing temperance lectures a year, firing up the crowd so much they unhitched the horses and drew her carriage through the streets with their hands. But she couldn't manage the boy. He took to running away from home. She apprenticed him to a lawyer. He ran away again and hopped a train for Buffalo. He wound up in a reform school, jumped out of a window, found a hobo camp, and spent the next 8 months as a tramp. Those 8 months furnished the experiences he describes in Homosexuality Among Tramps. Here are some of what he said. Every hobo in the United States knows what unnatural intercourse means, talking about it freely, and according to my finding, every 10th man practices it and defends his conduct. Boys are the victims of this passion. On the road, the lad is called a Prussian, and his protector, a jocker. Note, here Willard introduces us to some hobo slang. Jockers and Prussians were essentially the same as the familiar pair of wolf and punk in jails. The jocker was the protector of the Prussian and had sexual rights in return. Willard continues, this indeed I find to be the general feeling among the boys when they have been thoroughly initiated. At first they do not submit and are inclined to run away or fight, but the men fondle and pet them, and after a while they do not seem to care. Some of them have told me they get as much pleasure out of the affair as the jocker does. Willard's life on the road ended in Utica, New York, where he was busted for vagrancy and wound up in the Oneida County Jail. He tells some good jail stories. In the daytime, the prisoners are let out into a long hall and can do much as they please. At night, they are shut up, 2 and even 4 in a cell. If there are any boys in the crowd, they are made use of by all who care to have them. In one of those places, I witnessed the fiercest fight I have ever seen among hobos. A boy was the cause of it. 2 men said they loved him, and he seemed to return the affection of both with equal desire. A fight with razors was suggested to settle who should have him. The men slashed away for over half an hour, cutting each other terribly, and then their backers stopped them for fear of fatal results. The boy was given to the one who was hurt the least. After 30 days in jail, winter was coming on, so Willard signed on to shovel coal aboard a transatlantic steamer which got him to Berlin, where his mother was living. She took him in and cleaned him up and got him enrolled at the university. But he kept up his hobo habits and went on tramping tours in Germany, England, and Russia. Leo Tolstoy let him stay for a while at his farm. Gertrude Stein knew him in London. She mentions him in the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas. Gertrude says he knew all about the London pubs. Then he set about freelancing articles for American magazines. The editors wanted tramp stories, and Willard obliged. Between 1893 and 1899, under the byline Josiah Flynt, he published 10 articles with titles like How Men Become Tramps and What to Do with the Tramp. His idea of what to do with the tramp was to put the tramp in jail. Willard had very incoherent views about the tramp problem. On the one hand, he thought tramps were parasites and predators, and he called for all beggars to be put in prison. At the same time, he romanticized them as free spirits, loyal and generous, true to their code, carefree wanderers, and knights of the road. A classic example of psychological splitting. Willard's travels took him to Venice, where he found a group of gay men in the circle of Horatio Brown. Brown was helping Havelock Ellis with his monumental study, Sexual Inversion. That is how it happened that Willard's report, Homosexuality Among Tramps, was added as an appendix to the 1897 edition of Sexual Inversion with the byline, Josiah Flynt. The entire edition was seized by the police, and only a few copies got out of the shop. All this while, Miss Frances Willard was busy with the Women's Christian Temperance Union and her 400 lectures a year. She campaigned for prohibition, but also for women's suffrage, prison reform, free kindergartens, vocational schools, the 8-hour day, workers' rights, government ownership of the railroads, vegetarianism, cremation, sensible women's clothing, elimination of the Electoral College, federal control of interstate commerce, and forest conservation. One of her ideas was for women to live in couples. The loves of women for each other grow more numerous each day, and I have pondered much why these things were. That so little should be said about them surprises me, for they are everywhere. In these days, when any capable and careful woman can honorably earn her own support, there is no village that has not the examples of two hearts in council, both of which are feminine. Lady Henry Somerset, president of the British W.C.T.U, gave her a bicycle, and Miss Willard learned to ride it, a small but significant triumph for equality. Here she is, struggling at first for balance and at last rolling merrily along. Miss Willard's crusades came to an end in early 1898. She was in New York, preparing to sail for England and France, when she contracted influenza and died after a brief illness. Josiah Flynt Willard, our tramp expert, was still in Europe. He received a letter from the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad with a business proposition. Come to America and advise on what to do about the tramp problem. He took up the offer and arrived in New York in the spring of 1898 and started work as a railroad detective at $10 a day. The gig only lasted 2 months because Willard was busy with journalism. In a space of 5 years, from 1899 to 1903, he published 6 books. First was Tramping with Tramps, compiling the magazine articles he wrote in Europe. Next was Notes of an Itinerant Policeman, about his time as a railway detective. Then Exposés, The Powers That Prey, and The World of Graft. And then 2 novels, The Little Brother and The Rise of Roderick Cloud. This cartoon, published in the literary journal The Bookman, shows Willard in a reverie, dreaming of the burglar, the cop, the bum, and the judge. Willard's tramp writing is full of disguised sexual fantasies. These were all about the jockers and Prussians, the older and younger partners in hobo couples. Willard's jockers come in 2 varieties, good jockers and bad jockers. This is a bad jocker luring boys to life on the road. Willard says, he happens along at their very weakest moments, and perceiving his advantage, cruelly fires their imagination with tales of adventure and travel, and before they discover their danger, he has them in his clutches. A few hours of careful tactics, and he has one of them riding away with him, not merely in the boxcar of a freight train, but on the through train to Hoboland. Upright citizens suspected that there was a lot of carrying on in those boxcars, and they were right. Willard tells us, one evening near Cumberland, Pennsylvania, I was an unwilling witness to one of the worst scenes that can be imagined. In company with 8 hobos, I was in a freight car attached to a slowly moving train. A colored boy succeeded in scrambling into the car, and when the train was well underway again, he was tripped up and seduced, to use the hobo euphemism, by each of the tramps. He made almost no resistance and joked and laughed about the business as if he had expected it. The evil jocker is a sexual predator, but there is also the good jocker who befriends homesick runaways and guides them back to their families. Willard imagined himself as a good jocker, the protector of a Prussian. He turned this fantasy into an entire novel called The Little Brother. A wayward boy named Benny is befriended by the tramp Blackie. After many exciting incidents, trips on freight trains, comradeship in hobo camps, knife fights with bad jockers, Benny is returned to his mother, and in a melodramatic surprise ending, he turns out to be Blackie's own son. After the run of 6 books in 5 years, Willard ran out of steam. He took to vanishing for long periods of time, going on tramp sprees. Late in 1906, he went to Chicago to do an expose for Cosmopolitan magazine. By this time, his health was undermined by drink and drugs. In January of 1907, he came down with pneumonia, and he died at the Kaiserhof Hotel, just 2 days short of his 38th birthday. This was the headline in the New York Herald: Tramp author vagabond dead. The New York Times said, Josiah Flynt Willard dead. They called him a tramp, author, and sociologist and said, Mr. Willard had tramped in every civilized country, wearing the costume of the working class of each particular nation he wandered through. His expose of pool hall gambling, The Pool Room Spider and the Gambling Fly, was published after his death.